So even though I've been familiar with Health for the last several years, it's only been the past year or two that I've really gotten into them. And it's been about a year since I talked about their newest record, Rat Wars, and at the time it was one of my favorite records. And I'm happy to report that it is still one of my favorite records, and it's still a record I listen to like on a weekly basis. I think that Rat Wars is almost undeniably one of the best industrial or electronic albums ever released. It's just an album that is so gripping and so well sequenced, and every song on there is great. Oftentimes I'll just find myself itching to listen to Hateful or Crack Metal or Future of Hell, but then I just end up listening to the entire album on repeat. And so it was really in light of that earlier this year I began to dive much more into Health's back catalog. And as I began listening to their other stuff, specifically Death Magic and Slaves of Fear, which we're going to be talking about today, I gained a greater appreciation for those records than I had before. Really, whenever I tell people about Health, I usually just say something to the extent that Health are a lot like Nine Inch Nails, and that's it. I don't say anything else. And it's sort of a joke, sort of not. The band is a lot like Nine Inch Nails. They definitely occupy that same industrial kind of space. But honestly, I don't think you would ever be able to mistake one band for the other. I do think that if you like one, then you'll like the other, but honestly, at the end of the day, the two bands just sound very different from one another. You can tell that they're of two different eras. But still, I think that both bands seek to accomplish more or less the same things. Both bands create music that's dark and moody and thoughtful. But with all that being said, despite the fact that I've been a Nine Inch Nails fan for, like well over a decade at this point, I still found it really difficult to get into Health's earlier stuff. And even though I actually listened to this album back when it came out, and it was my first real Health experience past the Max Payne 3 soundtrack, it wasn't until recently that I began to fully appreciate it. I think that despite being very polished, this album is still very difficult to get into, like surprisingly difficult to get into. And I saw one review that said that the album has a lot of violence on it, despite the fact that there aren't really any screamed vocals. Which, reflecting on that statement, it's quite the feat that the band managed to accomplish this. Volume 4, Slaves of Fear, was the first album that the band made after losing their keyboardist, and therefore it was the first record that the band made as a three-piece. And really it is their first foray into the metal genre. Their first two records were more noise rock, and then they did the Max Payne 3 soundtrack and came out a different beast, and their third record, Death Magic, was actually very poppy. But still, it retained a lot of those noise rock sensibilities. There's a huge focus on the drumming on that album, and even though it is kind of poppy, and as with this album, even though it's well polished, it is still more difficult to get into than your normal pop record. Death Magic has been compared by a lot of people to Pretty Hate Machine by Nine Inch Nails, and I think I've even compared it to that album. But at the end of the day, Pretty Hate Machine is a lot more accessible than Death Magic is. And so Volume 4, Slaves of Fear, takes the Death Magic formula, it takes the industrial, more poppy sound that they were able to come up with on that album, and it adds a lot of weird influences to it. As I said, this is their first foray into metal, and so there's a lot of heaviness present on this album that isn't present on previous Health releases. There's some trap beats, and really there are some extremely dark lyrics. And even though Death Magic was more poppy and upbeat sounding, even though you have songs like Life on it that are very clearly pop songs, that album is still very dark. It's still a very drug-focused album. But I think Slaves of Fear takes the darkness of Death Magic and it turns it up to 11. This album is one of the most nihilistic pieces of music I've ever heard. It is just darkness and unhappiness all the way through. Even the more danceable tracks on this are still absolutely miserable. And I think typically speaking, whenever we talk about dark records, usually they have at least one or two patches of light on them. If we look at Songs of a Lost World by The Cure, for instance, even though that album is dark and even though it's basically about aging and dying, you still have kind of happy songs. Or maybe happy isn't the right word, but you have stuff that isn't absolutely miserable. I'm thinking of songs like All I Ever Am or A Fragile Thing, and I think there's a sense of beauty on that album. I think that album's really gorgeous sounding. So even though that album is dark, I still think that there's a patch of sunshine, and I think the Downward Spiral is another instance of this. That album is very dark, it's very nihilistic, it's very angry. And I really think that album is a difficult, inaccessible record, especially on your very first listen. But still, on that record, you do have A Warm Place. You do have a song on there, even if it's only one, you do have a song on there that's kind of beautiful. And just as an aside, I will talk about the Downward Spiral at a future date. That has been my most requested video by far. I will do it. I'll probably do it within the next 6 months, but yeah, it's coming, it'll happen. If you want another example of a dark album that has patches of sunshine, I think Disintegration is another good example because you do have darker tracks, you have the title track, you have Prayers for Rain and The Same Deep Water as You, but at the same time you do have Love Song on there, you do have Pictures of You, songs that are more pretty and beautiful. But Slaves of Fear is not really like that. There isn't really any beauty on this album. There isn't anything to be happy about. In that sense, it is closer to Pornography by The Cure. Slaves of Fear is just a record that is miserable and confused and questions why. Why am I alive? What is the purpose of life? Why am I here? What am I doing? And I remember whenever I first heard this record, whenever I first listened to it back in 2019, whenever it dropped, I wasn't really all that into it. I liked a lot of songs on this album, but at the same time, it did feel too edgy for me, honestly. It just felt overwhelmingly dark, and so because of that, at the time, I interpreted it as being immature almost. But then since I've revisited it, I've found it more meaningful. See, this album was recorded after the mother of Jake Duzik, the lead singer, passed away, and so I think within that context, I think the record makes a lot more sense. And even though I think the record is dark and extremely nihilistic, I think sometimes that's what you need. I think even though there's not really a shred of hope to be found on this record, I think sometimes that's just what you're looking for. And so I think this is one of those records that I certainly appreciate now a lot more than I did whenever it came out. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels that way. I remember that whenever this record dropped, it did get some less than stellar reviews, specifically from Pitchfork, who gave it a 3.4 out of 10, which is just absurd, I think. But I mean, also Pitchfork kind of sucks. Like, not even kind of, it's just like Pitchfork straight up sucks. They're not a good website. This is the same website that gave The Fragile by 9 Inch Nails, which is one of my favorite records ever. They give it a 2.0 out of 10. And so I guess that if you look at it that way, then I guess this record kind of finds itself in good company. Because really, over the past year or so, this record has grown into one of my favorite albums, period. And so with that, let's go ahead and hop into it. So track 1 is Psychonaut, and of course a psychonaut is someone who experiments with the altering of their mind through psychedelics and hallucinogens. The song starts off with a really pretty acoustic intro. It reminds me a lot of the traditional song Romance, but it's not that. But after the short acoustic intro to the track, you just hear these really pounding, loud, banging industrial drums. And so if you cut off the acoustic intro to the track, then the back half of the track is only like a minute and a half long. And I think that's a characteristic of a lot of songs on this record. They're actually pretty short. The band doesn't try to extend songs where they don't feel they need to. A lot of the songs on here don't follow the traditional pop song structure of, like verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. There are a couple songs on here that just have like 2 verses basically. And so I think that's part of the reason why this album feels so abrasive. Even though a lot of the songs on here are short, it is more difficult to get a grasp on them than a lot of other tracks that you might hear out in the wild. But at the same time, I do think the record actually benefits from the shortness of some songs, such as Psychonaut, just because of the fact that nothing really overstays its welcome. But Psychonaut starts off the record with the lines, "We don't get a million years, but it's long enough for me." And I think that's as good of an introduction to the record as any, just because that's kind of the premise of the album, that we're all going to die. We're all gonna die, and life sucks, and people die, and life sucks, and people die. And that's basically the record. And it's more than that, because throughout the album, the speaker rejects any kind of existence of God or any higher purpose to life. And so I think it's important to note that whenever he says, "We don't get a million years, but it's long enough to me," he's speaking as someone who does not believe in an afterlife. And so I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind whenever you're listening to this album, because there's this entire idea on the record that things suck, people die, and it's never going to get any better. You can have your strange beliefs, you can have your waking dreams. I'm learning to let it be like an endless sleep. Those are the lines that end this song, and really they just reinforce the things that I'm saying. That line, "I'm learning to let it be," seems to be in reference to just living life and all the horrors that you see. And so with that, that is the first track, Psychonaut, which starts off the record. As you can tell, we're already in for a wonderful time. Track 2 on the album is Feel Nothing, which is perhaps the most upbeat, danceable track on the record. And in fact, I think it's so upbeat and danceable that you might even be able to forget about the fact that it is about numbing yourself. I think Death Magic talks a lot about drug use, specifically for the same reasons, that is, to numb yourself from the pain of life. And really, I think these lyrics at the end of verse 1 sum up the song. "We want to soothe the burn, we want to dull the hurt. Why should we try so hard? Let's get numb till we don't feel nothing. There's comfort here in the dole, let's get numb till we don't feel nothing." And so I really do think that the numbness that the speaker of the song is seeking out is in reference to the horrors of life as mentioned in the previous song. And so I think that within the context of Psychonaut, the lyrics to this song are really interesting, just because Psychonaut does start off with the lyrics, "We don't get a million years, but it's long enough for me," but then Feel Nothing is about numbing yourself. And so I wonder if the entire "we don't get a million years, but it's long enough for me" is a sort of denial. Like you're trying to say that you're okay with not living forever, but deep inside you feel this anxiety or this fear. And so I see Feel Nothing as a direct response to that, basically. It's essentially saying, if there is fear, then let's numb it out, let's blot it out, let's hide it. And so we'll talk more about this later on the title track, but this album is called Slaves of Fear, and so I think a lot of the songs on here are in reference to that. I think that fear, whether or not it is admitted in the songs, is very much in the back of the speaker's mind. After all, if you were perfectly happy, if you were unafraid, then why would you want to feel nothing? The reason you want to be numb, the reason you would want to feel nothing is because life hurts and you want to be numb against it. You're scared of feeling pain in the future. And so as a result, you choose to numb yourself. And I think that sums up Feel Nothing. Track 3 on the album is God Botherer, which is one of my favorite songs by them. It has about a 20 or 30 second intro, and the song is only about 2.5 minutes long. And this song is a prime example of what I was saying earlier, that a lot of the songs on this record don't follow the traditional pop song structure. There are some really heavy, powerful guitars on this track, and I think that this is what separates the album from Death Magic. The heaviness of the guitars and the metal that the band was able to infuse into their music on this album. This song starts off with a lyric, "I wake up in the dark at night," and basically I interpret it as being about that. Basically waking up in the middle of the night and having all these existential questions in your head. And really, the song is mostly questions. Do we learn to fear? Do you ever think about me? Does it matter if we're here? How does it feel? What do you think? Are you happy? And I find the chorus of the song to be really interesting. Faith in everything, faith in what you need, faith in everything, now, pain in everything you know. It reminds me a lot of the song Faith off of The Cure's album Faith. What I mean is that both songs seem to talk about the idea of faith getting you through things and helping you through something, but I think both songs are really about lacking faith. I like the switch from faith in everything to pain in everything you know, because I think these lines reflect a sort of growing cynicism. Basically, I think there are times when it's really easy to be hopeful, or maybe it's hard to be hopeful, but you strive to be anyway, and then something hits you and you just lose all of it. You lose all your positivity and you lose all of your joy, and you're just filled with negativity. And not only are you filled with negativity, you're filled with pain in everything you know, which goes back to the idea, of course, that there are reasons why you may want to feel nothing, why you may want to numb yourself. But really, God Botherer is a cryptic track. There are a lot of songs on here that I can say that about, but I think that God Botherer is the best example of that. Whenever I talk about the lyrics to this album, or whenever I talk about the lyrics to any album really, I'm just giving my own interpretation of the words. But at the end of the day, there are some songs that are just so cryptic that you have no clue what the writer was thinking about whenever they were writing them. And so really, I think that's all you can do, is I think that you can only just bring in your personal interpretation of things and try to hope that it makes sense to other people. Track 4 on the album is Black Static, which is probably my favorite song on the record and one of my favorite Health songs, period. It just features these low, really heavy chugging guitars throughout the song. They sound very steady and powerful. I saw where someone compared this song to Tears off of the Max Payne 3 soundtrack, and I think that's a fair comparison, although this song is a lot heavier than Tears. 6 in the morning, everyone's coming down, whatever we're taking, everyone's running out. And so really, I think this song goes back to the familiar theme that Health has addressed before of drug use. God is coming, no one called for me, God is coming, he don't remember me. Which these lyrics specifically refer to the feeling of being forgotten by the Almighty. And I find these lyrics really telling because it suggests that there's still this kind of hope for faith. There's still this kind of hope for faith in the Almighty. Even though it's difficult to see this record as anything but atheistic, I still think that this song kind of addresses that hope. But then there's also that pain where it's like you kind of hope there's a God, but if there is a God, then you feel forgotten. And so I think that in some ways it's actually worse. And there are more lines on this song that go back to the idea of fear. I wasn't worried before I was born, why would I worry after I'm gone? And the reason you worry in life is because of everything that life is. You worry about love, you worry about work, you worry about feeding yourself, you worry about where to live, you worry about if your life has meaning. There are so many things that you worry about. There are an infinite amount of reasons to be fearful and to be anxious. But I think these lyrics specifically are referring to the idea of worrying about what will happen in the world after you're dead. And I think that's a very fair fear. I think that everyone wants their loved ones to be well off. I think that people want their work to be taken care of, whatever it was. I think that if you have any pets or family members or whatever, then you want to make sure they're okay. And so I think it's completely justified and fair to worry about what things will be like after you're gone. But still, there's that question that the singer seems to bring up. Basically, the question is, if you didn't have to worry about things before you were born, then why would you have to worry about things after you were born? And I really love the outro to this song. The way this song is structured is you have a verse, chorus, and then you have an outro. And I think the outro to the song is even heavier than the rest of the song, which is one of the heaviest songs on the record. I try not to worry at night, for peace on earth, peace in my mind. The bullets in blood bringing me down. I try not to worry at night, for peace on earth or peace of my mind, telling myself it's not so bad to die in your sleep. That's one of the most hopeless freaking lyrics I've ever heard. It's not so bad to die in your sleep? That is awful. But again, I think it goes back to the title of the record, Slaves of Fear, and really telling yourself that it's not so bad to die in your sleep is an attempt to beat that fear. But yeah, Black Static has always been one of my favorite songs on this record. Even before I really fell in love with this record as a whole, I always liked Black Static. Lost Deluxe is actually a song I've talked about before on my channel. I talked about it in my second Signalis video. So I want to avoid repeating myself, but basically this song continues on the very abrasive style of the rest of the album thus far. It's a very heavy song about, guess what? About the meaninglessness of life and about things dying. What will your life be like in the ground? Did you figure it out or die of greed? There's no way to fight the new diseases. We're here on our own, starting over. Life is not but rocks and dirt and bitterness now, here to lose our mothers, you and all the others, sit around and watch the world burn and pity ourselves. So yeah, I don't have too much to say about this other than it's just freaking hopeless. It's just one of the most miserable things you could write. Basically, it seems to be really focused on this idea that in the end, we all die. In the end, we all return to the ground. Everyone we've ever loved will die. Everything we've ever loved will die. And 1,000 years from now, we'll all just be dirt. And so it's difficult to think of something more miserable than this. And I just want to say, I always love health titles. Lost Deluxe, I think, is a phenomenal title. I think they're always able to come up with like super cool song titles. And so I really just have always appreciated that about the band. Track 6 is NC-17. And this song has a very different vibe to it than the rest of the album. It has a lot of trap beats. The vocals on this song are very distant and almost wavy sounding compared to a lot of other tracks on the album. And really, I think NC-17 is maybe the most underrated health track. It's one I freaking love, but I wonder if people don't like it because it's kind of odd. How are we supposed to stop? When I look back, I don't ever want another chance. I wonder why we started all. And so I think this song seems to be asking the question, why do we even live if it's all just pain? If every day is just full of trials and tribulations, then what's the point? And again, if you don't believe in any higher power, if you don't believe in a purpose to life or anything, if you don't believe in any sort of meaning, then it's easy to fall into that sort of thought process, I think. I think this is the sort of nihilism that Friedrich Nietzsche was warning about. Because Nietzsche was a really smart dude, obviously, and so he sort of realized that without anything to believe in, people would fall into nihilism. So that's what his entire body of work was about. It was about trying to escape nihilism. Nietzsche tried to give people something to believe in. He wrote about the Übermensch, he wrote about amor fati, or the love of fate, the love of everything that happens. And I honestly think Nietzsche's works are quite inspiring. And so really, I think this sort of health mindset is what Nietzsche was trying to address, albeit 150 years before the band. And I really love the line, "We're trapped in a primitive past," because I sort of interpret that as being about how there are many people in this day and age, or there are many things in society that seem backwards. I can look around at a lot of things that I experience on a daily basis, and I can go, why are things like this? Why is the housing market screwed up? Why is insurance screwed up? Why can't anyone find love? Why can't anyone get a job? I've talked about this before, but I think it's really easy to look around at life as it currently is and to just feel completely hopeless. And so that's how I interpret that line, "We're trapped in a primitive past," just because I think it speaks to the idea that in some ways we've come a really long way. In some ways, we as a species have made bigger strides than ever before. But in other respects, it's baffling that certain things are still the way they are. And so with that, with NC-17, that ends side A of the record. Track 7 on this album is The Message. And guess what the message is about? It's about dying and being dead. Woo! Death wants to make you a part of it. You're coming with me. Saints, criminals, all just killing time. Death waits to make your peace with it. You'll be fine. Basically, it's just this idea that death is coming for everyone. Death is coming for you. It's coming for me. We're all gonna die sooner or later. It doesn't matter if you've lived a good life or a bad life. It doesn't matter whether or not you've been a good, virtuous person or whether or not you've been an evil, horrible, criminal. You're still gonna die in the end. Everyone's gonna die in the end. I like the line, "You'll be fine," because it strikes me as pretty sarcastic. It's like, we're all gonna die, but don't worry, in the end you'll be fine, even though you'll be dead. It doesn't matter if you're ready yet, you're coming with me. The rich, the beautiful, everyone's in line. And I like these lyrics towards the end of the song, "Dead for a moment, dead for a nice age, why not let me be?" I basically interpret these lyrics as being about how you will be dead for a moment and also dead forever. Because after you die, then you're dead, and you're dead a lot longer than you're alive. But in some ways that means that it's a moment because it's the same, because you'll be dead. You're just dead indefinitely. But then at the same time, the act of dying is only a moment. You know, there's a specific moment you can point to when someone passes from the realm of the living to the realm of the dead. So you're dead for a moment, but you're dead for an ice age because you're dead for a very long time afterwards. And so as I was saying earlier, I think that you have to keep this idea in mind that the speaker, whenever he's speaking, doesn't believe in any sort of higher power. And so I think the entire concept of death will be viewed differently if you believe in an afterlife or if you believe in reincarnation. If you believe that something happens after death, you will view death as a concept differently than someone who does not believe in any of that. And so I think that whenever you look at the song, you have to look at it that way. Basically, within the context of the song, there is nothing after death. It's just, you're dead. And it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter if you're rich or beautiful, you're still going to die. And I suppose that all these thoughts come together to form something that is very morbid. And again, very hopeless. The choruses of the song state that death is the message without meaning. This line always makes me go back to the idea that the medium is the message. I interpret these lyrics as basically saying that there is no point to dying, there is no point to death, there is no point to any of it. It just kind of happens. Which again, if you believe in a higher power, if you believe in heaven or hell or nirvana or reincarnation, whatever, then I think that you'll view these lyrics in a fundamentally different way than the speaker does. But this is how the speaker sees death. But I do really love these lyrics. When we're young, we can't wait to grow up. We get old, we give up, and we pray to grow young. I think there's this problem that we all sort of encounter where no one's really happy with their age. As the song says, whenever you're young, you wish that you were older because you wish that you would be able to do certain things. But then whenever you actually do get older and you're able to do whatever things you wanted to do, then you keep on getting older. It's not like you turn 25 and then you're just 25 forever. It's like you're 25 and then you're 35 and then you're 50 and 70 and blah, blah, blah. And you keep on aging, basically. And then of course, whenever you get to that point, whenever you're like 80 or 90 years old, then you must be like, man, I wish I was young again. I wish I weren't so close to dying, basically. But this song is one of my favorites off this record. Despite its depressing lyrics, I think that instrumentally, the track is actually quite danceable. It has a very steady beat to it throughout the song, and I think it's just supremely catchy. This song also does feature backing vocals by the guy from Code Orange, which is kind of cool. They're a band I like, but I'm not as familiar with them as I probably should be. But no, The Message is one of the best songs on this record, I think. Track 8 is Rat Wars, not to be confused with the album Rat Wars. You see, Rat Wars is not a track on Rat Wars, it is a track on Slaves of Fear. I still don't really know why they chose this song title as the name of their 5th album, but it works, I guess. This song returns to the idea that Lost Deluxe brought up of not really caring what happened before you were alive. What was here before the rocks and forests, I don't care. It's hard enough to deal with human forces. I've been calling back to those before us, but they didn't hear. Then there are some lyrics on here that are just so bitter and angry. I was never happy for you, you were weighing me down. You never trusted me, but I'm over it now. Guys, I don't think he's actually over it. Then you have these lyrics that speak to the lack of purpose or meaning that the speaker feels. I looked underneath the dirt and bodies and there's nothing there. If I can hear the voices echoing, it's in my head. Did you find a higher purpose? It never worked for me, I'm just waiting around. Basically, it just returns to the sort of idea that life is meaningless and we all die. It speaks to the idea of waiting around to die, which is actually a power trip song. This song, like God Botherer, doesn't have a traditional song structure, and so I do think it is harder to get into as a result, but I still think it's really good. Track 9 is Strange Days 1999. Basically, this song, like The Message, speaks to the idea of never being able to grow young again, basically never being able to return back to where you were. We can't go back, strange days slowing down. Slowing down, slow it down. Strange days slowing down. You don't worry now, but where will you be when they come? When it says when they come, I do wonder if that's talking about death, as mentioned in The Message. And in fact, I do think that this song, Strange Days, and The Message go quite well together. I really love this lyric, and I wanted to talk about it in a separate video, but I don't think I ever have. Years before we met, is time a gift or punishment? Basically, I think that question, is time a gift or punishment? I think that is just such an interesting, good question to ask. Because again, as it states in The Message, whenever you're young, you want to be older, but then whenever you're older, you want to be younger. And so it sort of asks this question, is time a gift or a punishment? Basically, are you waiting around for something to change, or are you doing something with your time and do you view it as beneficial to you? And I think that sometimes it feels like it can be both. I think that I've struggled with this over the last couple of years, so I do think I'm getting better with it, where I think that in a lot of ways it feels like I wish that I were farther along in certain areas than I am. Some days I do wish I could play the tape forward and see where I am in 5 or 10 years or something like that. And it goes back to this idea of like constantly putting happiness off into the future, which is not good. I do think that you have to let yourself be happy now as opposed to just imagining one day far away whenever you will be fully happy, whatever that means, fully happy. But no, I think that question, is time a gift or a punishment? I think that's so important to ask yourself. Basically, are you doing something worthwhile with your time? Are you making good use of your time? Are you happy? Are you finding yourself happy? Are you striving to be happy in the time you've been given? Or is it all just a endless day, basically? Is it all just one long experience of torture? And so that's a lyric that I really love, and that's one of my favorite lyrics off this album. Is time a gift or punishment? It's up to you to decide. Track 10 is Wrong Bag, which is an instrumental, and if you ask me, I think this is finally where the album loses some momentum. I think the album up until this track is phenomenal, and I think the rest of the album is really good too, but I think Wrong Bag is kind of the divider line. As I said, it's an instrumental, and I do think it is a heavy track. I think it's a very powerful track, and I do think that it has the closest thing to a moment of beauty that you'll find on it within the last 30 seconds to a minute of the track. That section of the track is very pretty and beautiful, but the rest of the track sounds industrial, basically. It sounds like a factory. It's really heavy. It's what you would expect from an industrial band. And I think the title of the song, Wrong Bag, is really quite menacing. I've always imagined it as being like you grab the wrong bag at the airport or something, and it turns out that, it's full of something bad, and then you get caught up in some kind of like gang activity or something on accident. That's always how I've imagined it, basically. Almost like a dumb movie thing. But yeah, Wrong Bag, I think, is the weakest track on the album. I think it's good, but for me, like I said, it's where the album essentially loses momentum. Then finally, the penultimate track, Slaves of Fear, we hit the title track of the album. And really, I think it kind of wraps up a lot of the themes on this record. Slaves of fear from the moment we're born. Yeah, we want to feel love or we want to be numb. Slaves of fear from the moment we're born. We want to be different, but we don't want to try too hard. Why do we waste our years when there's nothing to fight about? Save your tears, we're here on our own. Why do we waste our years till it's someone else's turn? And so I think these lyrics very directly ask the question, why do we fear in the first place? Like, if we're all gonna die and if things suck, then why are we scared? Because we have nothing to lose. This song asks the question, why are we scared of being different? Why are we scared of putting ourselves out there? Why are we scared of living as we want to live? Because in the end, we all die and it doesn't matter. So it's still a nihilistic view of life, but it's a kind of positive nihilism. It's like that meme where it's like what people think nihilism is like versus what it really is like. But I do think that this song, and by extension this album, given its title, make a really interesting and valid point about how we live our lives, which is just that we shouldn't be slaves of fear. We shouldn't let fear control us or dominate us. We shouldn't let it dominate our minds and make us decide what to do or what not to do. So many actions that we take are driven by fear. We do certain things because we're afraid of what will happen if we don't do them, and then we don't do things because we're afraid of what will happen if we do them. And so basically the song is saying that that's a load of bogus. In essence, it's wrong to feel that way, or it's foolish to let fear control you. I think fear is a natural human emotion, and I think it's completely normal to feel fear, but at the same time, I think it's a really bad idea to give into it and to let it control you. And so sometimes this track does feel a little preachy to me because of that, because it is directly addressing the themes brought up on the rest of the album, but then other times I think it's exactly what you need to hear. I think it's very catchy, and I think it's one of those that they should probably play live, because they don't really play it live. But I do think it's a really great track, and I do think that the fact that the album is named after the song says a lot about the song and its importance to the band. Then finally, the last track on the album is Decimation. I'll be honest, it's not one of my favorites. It's one that I've learned to like a lot more than I once did, but it is a slower song, and I do think that the fact that it's placed after Slaves of Fear is really important because it seems to address the same fears brought up on the rest of the album. If we're to fall, what can I do? Where do we go? I could be next. We can't go back, no one can. We can't go back, no one has. It's over now, we never will. And so it seems to be a song about finally dying, or at the very least finally accepting that we all die. I see this song as essentially being about being an old person looking back on your life and seeing it for what it is. That's my interpretation of the song. That's what it makes me think of. And so in that sense, I think that this final track makes the album feel all that more encompassing, because the honest truth is that I don't think that the fear of dying will ever really leave us. I think that at certain points, all of us will ask questions like, what am I doing with my life? What is the purpose of what I'm doing? What is the purpose of life? What is the meaning of where I am and the way things are. These are questions that I don't know if you can ever 100% escape. Even if you believe in God or gods or higher purpose or a meaning, even if you believe in a higher power or if you have great faith, then I think that sometimes all of us still feel fear. I think we all feel scared, and I think we're all human, and I think it's impossible, nearly impossible, to get rid of that fear. And so with that, I guess that wraps up the album. So as I was saying, Slaves of Fear is an album that I didn't fully appreciate until after I had gotten into Health because of Rat Wars. I heard it many years ago, but I didn't appreciate it as much as I do now. Still, as I'm saying, I do think that it's a somewhat inaccessible record. It's very polished, it's very listenable, but still it's hard to get into, I think. And so with that, normally with these sorts of videos I have more to say at the end, but I guess I don't really with this one. I do think that this is the second best Health record after Rat Wars. I think this one is better than Death Magnetic. No, that's a Metallica album. I do think this record is better than Death Magnetic for sure. No, I think this record is better than Death Magic. That's what I wanted to say. I think this record is better than Death Magic, but I still like Death Magic a lot. And in fact, I was even going to talk about that album first, but then I kind of just got into this one. I've been listening to this one a lot recently. And so, really, this is what I have to say about Volume 4 Slaves of Fear by the band Health. So, thank you for watching. Let me know what you want me to look at next. Yeah, thank you. Have a nice night. Don't die. Don't die. Please don't die. That's bad. But yeah, thank you. Bye.